Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be covering the Analects and continuing our journey through chapter 10. As always, we'll have one or two readings, and then Jason will go ahead and share his translation with us, and then we can comment on it as we see appropriate. So Penny, would you do the honors?
Yes. Okay, this is book 10, mine says chapter 8. He did not dislike to have his rice finely cleaned, nor to have his minced meat cut quite small. He did not eat rice which had been injured by heat or damp and turned sour, nor fish or flesh which was gone. He did not eat what was discolored, or what was of bad flavor, nor anything which was ill cooked or was not in season. He did not eat meat which was not cut properly, nor what was served without its proper sauce. Though there might be a large quantity of meat, he would not allow what he took to exceed the due proportion for the rice. It was only in wine that he laid down no limit for himself, but he did not allow himself to be confused by it. He did not partake of wine and dried meat bought in the market. He was never without ginger when he ate. He did not eat much. When he had been assisting at the prince's sacrifice, he did not keep the flesh which he received overnight. The flesh of his family sacrifice he did not keep over 3 days. It kept over.
So let's stop here. Let's stop here. Okay, so
this one just goes on and on.
yeah, let's go on.
Yeah,
So
I think that for some reason, I think that this is that's a little bit longer than any of the translations that I'd seen. Would anybody else like to read
we
their
should stop
translation?
on the ginger part.
Okay.
If not, I can go ahead and read. Would you? Or okay. Confucius did not dislike boiled rice that was cooked with well-polished rice, or sliced raw meat or fish that was finely cut. He did not eat rice that had turned sour or stank, or fish that had spoiled and flesh that had gone bad. He did not eat what looked bad. He did not eat what smelled bad. He did not eat what was poorly cooked. He did not eat except at the proper times. He did not eat meat that was not cut squarely. He did not eat meat that was served without its proper sauce, even when meat was abundant. He did not allow what he took to overpower the flavor of the rice.
Oh, okay.
Flavor of rice, not the rice.
So let me do the translation, and then it's long, so I kind of like two things I'd like to mention. First, here is nothing talk about Confucius. Okay, so basics in book 10, we just assume whatever the text shows, and we are talking about Confucius. That's just an assumption, because in the text there's no word about the master or Confucius. Secondly, I heard a lot of translation that do the rice. They talk about rice, but I think that's in a way here, I look at all the text, there's no single word called rice, okay? They use a lot. If you can recognize Chinese, this word, 食, okay? And almost every, I break down to 12, right? Every verse have this word called 食, right? And that doesn't mean rice, that means eat it, it's a verb. Okay, and here used as a verb, not used as a noun, as rice. So, so I would disagree on any translation talking about rice, because you just assume Chinese is rice. So that's the second thing. Third thing, and if you in general feeling, then I kind of like to look at this one as a describe instead of a rule of eating. Okay, I would look at how describe a description of Confucius' daily life. Okay, so you can see in other texts also, you can figure out Confucius like to eat meat. Okay, he definitely no vegetarian. Okay, he liked meat. Okay, second, he liked to drink. Okay, he probably can drink a lot. Okay, so in the later part, constantly talk about Confucius drinking. So he probably this kind of person. You can imagine a big guy. His father is a giant, like 9 feet. Okay, that's in Chinese feet, but probably today is 60 feet tall man. And Confucius also a big guy, so he like meat, like to drink. Okay, so let me translate. I'm going to translate the verse by verse. So, so Confucius like food to be finely cooked and the meat to be finely minced. So this first one is a little bit difficult. In Chinese called 食不厌精 and 快不厌细. That means he not dissatisfied. Oh, how to translate this word? He's talking about not satisfied with finely food. So they have the two meaning. In today's meaning means you are Epicurean, okay? But I think here the proper way to translate should be he not dislike the finely cooked food, not dislike the meat to be finely minced. Okay, so that's the first thing I like to mention in the first verse. Second thing, he didn't eat food of changed quality or flavor, or rotten fish or meat. Okay, so I just translate word by word. Okay, he didn't eat food of bad color. Okay, the color is not good. He didn't want it. He didn't eat food of bad flavor. That's number 4. He didn't eat food that was not properly cooked. Okay. So up to this moment, the 5 things, I think the essence probably you will see is the distinguish between a cultured man and the barbarian. I think that's what probably the essence here, because food must be properly cooked, must be minced, meat must be minced, finely cooked, right? Don't eat the rotten fish, rotten meat. The color should not change. That means fresh. The flavor should not have a bad flavor. Okay, unlike not eating sashimi, which is raw, or in the nomad tribe, right? They eat the meat usually in the big chunk. Okay, or in Western world, it's steak. That's a big chunk. So the kind of separate the cultured man and the so-called barbarian. Okay, so I think that's probably the essence. So he didn't eat food except at the proper time. So my comment would be no snacks. He didn't eat food that was not properly cut. I see the translation to the not cut square, which is translated with this word, 正. Okay, that means not cut, 正, he doesn't eat. 正 means square, but I think here doesn't mean square, it means properly cut. Okay, so he didn't eat food without its sauce. So he certain kind of food with certain sauce. That's what he wants. So actually, he enjoy food. He think the food, should eat in the proper way, not in the culture. Also, good taste is important. He ate a lot of meat, but he never allowed more meat than other food. This translation, I didn't honor the original. The original said a lot of meat, this one. Okay, but not over. He used the word qi, okay, 食气, the food qi, okay. So I think here, he used the qi probably means about the health preservation. That's the concept of health. So he's talking about Confucius like meat. So he eat a lot of meat because he's a big guy. But he would not eat too much to over is necessary or for the health reason, okay? Because he used the word qi here. Number 10 will be interesting. It was only wine with which he didn't limit himself, okay? So he can drink a lot. He has no limit. Doesn't say I only drink 2 cups of wine or I only drink 1 bottle per night. No, he didn't say it based on situation. He has no limit, but he never lost control. So that means he can drink a lot. He never got drunk. He didn't eat meat or drink wine purchased from the market. So this one is, I don't know what that means. You know, basics. He probably want to do the house wine and the meat slaughtered by himself or get us from the friend or meat from the prince. Probably that's the reason. Because it's a waste to buy outside. I don't know, you know, what that's he said. Number 12, he didn't remove ginger from his food, but he will not overdo it. So in today's sense, he probably, and with others, he probably like eat spicy food, right? And with a strong flavor, but he will not doing too much in the proper way. So I think that's the description, and I try my best to translate line by line and to back to the original text. Amang, if you have anything you want to talk about.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to point out, I have a few thoughts, but I'll try and stay as succinct as I can. First, this is the verse where the Leggy and other translations tend to go off the rails in terms of continuity. This is where you'll see it break down, because that question of what belongs here is really hard for a lot of people to make those decisions, because right after this, we'll then begin talking again about portions of meat. However, I believe the Leggy version, which was what Penny was reading, continues all the way into the next chapter, and I believe maybe even to the one after that. So we'll start to see this discontinuity breaking apart here. That's the first thing I wanted to say. In fact, I kind of warned in the notes back and forth with Jason, and I think we'll see it in the next one, that the Leggy version combines 10.8, 10.9, 10.10 into one long verse. And I think Joe's translation may have captured some of that as well. That's one about the meta structure. As to the details of wording, sure, Jason's correct. It's a verb. It's used as a verb. This is where I could get into the minutia of the Chinese language a little bit, but to keep it simple, once upon a time, Chinese was a monosyllabic language. One word equals one thought. In modern Chinese, they've made it bisyllabic or dual syllabic in order to distinguish a lot of these sounds that are homonyms or hard to decide if we're talking about a verb or a noun. So the modern phrase for to eat is 吃饭, which actually literally means eat rice. And it is part of the component of each of the character that the idea of some sort of grain millet is involved, because that is, as I believe Chris pointed out in the chat, part of the staple of the Chinese diet. So to eat rice is to say something like have a meal. It means virtually the same thing. Monosyllabic classic Chinese is more challenging because you don't have that second modifier to tell you this is meant to be a verb or this is meant to be a noun. And so when we see sure again and again and again, we have to make the assumption, and I think Jason makes the correct one, that is it meaning to be the verb discussing how he eats, or are we talking about the subject of rice passage after passage? I agree with Jason. This is about to eat. I could go on about Zhang, the idea of correctness or uprightness or stopping at the precise point. It was a word that we dissected a bit when we did the Tao Te Ching. But again, the idea that there is a proper way these things are done just emanates off the page. There is a proper way food is to be cut. There's a proper amount of portions. And we talked about drinking culture a bit last week, but even here we can see it is proper that there isn't a limit on how much you drink, because what it is meant to do is to reveal more of your true character. And Confucius's character being above reproach meant that he was unconstrained in the amount he could drink. But I loved in the Leggy translation where it says, but he did not become confused. What they call confused, we would mean as blind, blithering drunk. And so there are layers to this that are sort of revealed, but I want to point out how it turns into a holdover into the modern Chinese culture with something everyone's familiar with: chopsticks and Chinese food. Chinese food, the proteins are usually cut small in what we think of as classic Chinese food. There are dozens of cuisines. I won't get into the details of, Shanghaiese versus, anyway, but portions of protein cut very small so that they can be carried with chopsticks. And the chopsticks are meant to connote how much is a proper portion to go into one's mouth. The irony of this being, although it's meant to create a sense of propriety, if you've seen how much some Chinese people can pack onto a set of chopsticks, it belies the very reason for them in the first place, and would probably make Confucius blanch. He'd probably smile that this was now the norm of how cuisine was meant to be eaten, and then balk when he saw a Chinese person lift a bowl to their face and just start scooping in shovel load after shovel load. So the propriety that this gives you does kind of leap off the page and becomes endemic to all of Chinese culture. But sticking, steadfastly to the rules versus getting your belly full when you're starving, we see people's nature tend to win out in the latter more than the former.
Muted. Sorry, I was muted there for a moment. Thank you, Aman. Would anybody else like to comment on this verse? I just noticed actually that my 10:15 would be combined with yours, Jason, actually. So it would be Confucius did not define set limits with wine, but guided people not to drink to intoxication. He did not consume wine sold by people or dried meat bought from the market. He did not put away the ginger snack, but he did not eat it in excess. So just a little clarification combining our 10:17 and 10:18. So there's a little bit there. I mean, if there's no comments, I'll just make a brief comment. I think, when I initially read this, I just think of temperance, and the idea that, yes, Confucius could drink a lot, as Aman had noted, but he didn't. and that a certain amount of self-discipline was actually enacted, and that is in line with virtue. And that's, I don't have a lot to add because I think a lot of this pertains to the time period, why they didn't necessarily eat meat in certain situations there. So Penny or Brian?
I think Edison have a question.
Oh, Allison as well.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice that he said have ginger with each meal, which I think is interesting because when pregnant women eat ginger because it helps settle your stomach. So it's kind of funny that even though he's saying like don't have too much of this or that, but eat the ginger because that's gonna calm you down, it's just a remedy for nausea. So it's interesting what's in there.
Thank you, Allison. Next up is Penny or Brian.
Yeah, I just wanted to say based kind of on what Joe had said too, that, at this period in time, like before refrigeration and stuff like that, there was probably a lot more food that was going bad that was eaten because it would be hard to keep it fresh. I mean, we have refrigerators now and stuff, and so we stick everything in them. But at that time, and I think a lot of the ordinary people probably would just eat it because, if that was the food they had, they would eat it, where he was a little bit higher culture. And so was able to say, no, this has gone a little bit bad. I'm not going to eat it. Doesn't smell good.
Thank you, Penny. Jason.
One thing I just checked with Zhu Xi's interpretation about the he didn't eat the food or wine from the market, and the Zhu Xi's comment is for the hygiene reason because he doesn't know it's clean or not if the food is from the market. So that's a Zhu Xi's comment. So, but I do have a question to the group. How do you feel on this one? Do you see that he's talking about neutrally, okay, or talking about it's a temperance, like what Joe said, or feel like, how do you feel on this decision? It means Confucius is self-control, or Confucius is enjoy the food?
I would like to answer that question, but I'll give Brian the opportunity to first. Go ahead, if you wish to answer or make your regular comment. Go ahead.
You had I'm sorry, I had kind of a different comment. We can come back to that question. That's a good one. I wonder who's cooking and cutting up all this food. I get the sense that Confucius isn't doing his own cooking. Who's doing it? The students or cooks?
The chef, he talked about the gentleman, 君子 will avoid the kitchen. Okay, so as a gentleman or 君子, you don't go to kitchen. So sorry.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought.
He do archery, he drive car, okay, he do some mean job, okay, but he doesn't cook because that's not a 君子 need to do. So, and traditionally, you see the Chinese novel, okay, in the rich family, they have a lot of servant, right? They do many things. The lowest ranking servant is working in the kitchen. Okay, so it's been seen as a low job.
Thank you,
Surprises
Brian. Go ahead. Were you gonna? Did you
That
have a follow-up?
surprises me because I thought the Chinese really enjoyed their food. It's considered one of the best cuisines in the world. I thought they would have a more cooks would have a higher standing.
I can't answer that, but Jason or Amon, do you want to say something about that really quickly or no?
I was trying to let Kevin and Chris
Okay.
hop in first, but very quickly. Their social standing is of a artisan / merchant class, which in later Confucianism puts them low, low in the hierarchy. Modern Chinese will actually refer to a chef sometimes as shifu, which means a master of their skill or art. And so I think in modern China, there is more respect for culinary art than there was necessarily back then, especially that many centuries ago. But that built over time. And I would add, in addition to a chef doing the proper cooking, there would probably be times, especially if traveling, where that wasn't an option. Then it was the wife's job.
Thank you. So I have Kevin, then Chris.
Yes, thank you, Joe. And for me, a little bit, I don't understand some of words. They said if you cut not proper, it's not eat. That's too much. That's mean you're so rich, got so much food. I'm not agree. That's generally up to old ancient time. It's not that rich. That's mean he got lots of food and meat fish. That's my question. And the second one, also he got, if not sauce not proper, he also didn't eat the food. So that's question for me. That's mean he's so. I don't know. That's for me. I would use one called Wangmeng. It said Chinese fill the butt. Not so many years. Last 50 years, I would say consider, or 70 years. It's a big thing for fill your stomach. Thank you.
Let me respond to Kevin's question or this one. I'm not trying to defend or Confucius, but I just try to make the tone correct, right? So let me read in Chinese, okay, just anything, so-called 歌不正不死, okay, so the first few words is, if not cut properly, he doesn't eat. Okay, let's put the logic right? So when the food put in front of me, if not being cut properly, I'm not going to eat. But he doesn't say he was going to throw away or something. He probably will request the servant to cut it properly. Okay, so probably that's the tone I read it. Okay, so I don't see it's spoiled kids. Okay, like, oh no, I'm not. It's throw away. It's okay. So I don't think that's the tone. I say, when I read the text, I feel he is talking about a proper way. For example, as a rule of thumb, right? In every, I believe most of family, the dining table, you will say, put your food on the plate. Okay, you don't want to put on the table and eat on the table, then clean the table. You don't do that, right? You will say, food not on the plate, I don't eat. So I think it's in this sense. That's my explanation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's my turn actually to talk.
Yes, go ahead,
And I wanted
please.
to agree with Jason on that and point out, as I pointed out in the chat, that Brooks came up with a very interesting, the original Analects by Brooks. The interesting point that you would cut across the meat, because you think about cutting into a steak that may be doubtful. If you cut lengthwise, you may miss a bad spot. If you cut across it, you'll see any rot that's inside the meat. Which I've also done some reading on in the I Ching, because there's some imagery in the Zhou that's similar about rotting meat. I mean, it was a time without refrigeration. It was a time of great hunger. So people would get pretty desperate and they would eat things they shouldn't have really eaten because they were so hungry. And I think that's the only point I had on the matter. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Chris. Amon.
I agree with everything that is being said here. I do think that there is a pragmatic element to it, and I also do think there is a classist element to it, because as Chris just pointed out, there is a practical reason for properly, I guess you'd say, properly butchering, the food that you're about to eat. And I can see even a frugal argument to be made of this when I think about, carving the turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. If you don't do it right, you don't get all the meat off the bird, which is just wasteful. That's wasting a lot of potential food. And so making sure that you cut it in the correct ways is not just about, avarice and gluttony. It's also a practicality of not wasting anything. However, that having been said, not everybody gets turkey for Thanksgiving. And in that next line about not having the proper sauce, not being willing to eat, I think the classicness really does come out. Confucius was of an aristocratic class, and this wasn't something shameful or something to shy away from or run away from. We sort of anachronistically would look at it and think, oh, to be, all so full of yourself, of being a higher class, that can't be an enlightened sage. But no, that is exactly what made someone an enlightened sage and gave them the credentials to claim that in his time and place. And so being something of an elitist, not incommensurate with the rest of Confucius values. But I do think that both these things can be true at the same time. And it takes taking ourselves out of time and place quite a bit to be able to, butcher ding. That's exactly the sort of chapter I was thinking of when I was thinking of butchering. But yeah, taking ourselves out of the time and place and putting ourselves back there and understanding that sort of classist chauvinism wasn't seen as a demerit. That is a product of us as sort of modern, post-romantic, post-liberal humanist order moderns, seeing that as a deficit. For Confucius, it was just one more sort of knock on the resume to say, yes, I have the right and place and proper credentialing to be able to say what I'm saying and be taken seriously.
Thank you, Aman. Stephen, or Sebastian, I'm sorry.
I saw this as an enlightenment to others. In order for you to cook, in order for you to be in the kitchen, in order for you to learn how to cut the meat, what to order, the temperatures and such, that itself is perhaps, in my opinion, hidden in what he's speaking about. Granted that the finished product does come on the table or plate or wherever he's eating, but the workmanship that goes into it, I think that's what he was, in my opinion, what I thought he was trying to explain to us. It wasn't just the fact that it was meat, it was cut in a proper fashion, it was eaten in a certain way. And like someone explained about the use of ginger. Yes, all these things fit in, but you have to have knowledge before you can make a comment about it. So he must have somewhere along the line come into this or learned about it or actually did it himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, just like a quick comment. When I read this one, I feel like he is, at least analog is talking about culture, talking about the proper way of eating, talking about hygiene, talking about health preservation, and also talking about eating as or drinking as enjoyment. So that's what I get. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Allison, please.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me in some ways of that the kosher food, and that there were all these very strict rules about it, because at that time, those are the rules that kept people safe while eating the food. Whereas nowadays, some of the rules may not make so much sense because we have refrigeration, we have all these things. So, they need that. But the other thing is also, I feel like, we could kind of look at it and say it's classes, but the fact is that, I think most, well, maybe not all parents, but I know when my son was young, I made a very big deal of taking him to nice restaurants so that he would learn how to behave. And I remember my mother giving me all these lessons about which fork to use and what, so it's sort of like you're preparing your child to enter a certain class that you want them to be a part of as they get older. So it's kind of a similar thing, that it's not done to be classist. It's just sort of like, this is what you're going to need to know to survive in this, the type of environment that you want them to live in as they grow up. I don't know.
Excellent points.
Yeah.
I mean, I think on both counts, especially the, equating it to how, kosher food was actually, prepared. So Miss Chara, forgive me if I missed your exclamation point, but then we'll go to Miss Chara, then Brian and Penny.
Hi, good evening. I also wanted to speak on the issue of the kosher meals and things like that. It was my understanding that Confucianism, like the different kinds of ritual that he was speaking on, falls into the 4 different categories: service of state, service of family, service of oneself, etc., etc. And so the connection that I made was that what he's encouraging to be practiced here also allows them to take in foods that allow them to perform at a higher level than a basic individual on the street, in their service to state.
Thank you, Miss Chara. Penny and Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to make a point about the proper cutting, because I thought my understanding was that if you eat with chopsticks, the food is supposed to be small enough that you pick it up and you put it in your mouth. So if it was cut in big pieces, then, in theory, you'd be trying to hold it in the chopsticks and like eat off of the chopsticks and bite into the thing into smaller pieces. And so if it was in a big piece, then it wasn't proper, because you couldn't stick that into your mouth. Just pick it up daintily and put it in your mouth.
I think Aman has a comment. And
I wanted to say I rue the day if Penny ever has to observe me eating chicken wings with chopsticks, because I will take a whole and that was from years of practice in Korean restaurants, dakgyeonggong, that I was like, oh, I gotta eat with the chopsticks. But yeah, I learned how to eat a drumstick with chopsticks by the time I was 7. And I'm not unique in that. But you are right. The conception behind the culinary art was that it should facilitate this sort of more dainty, more measured, more careful process of eating one bite after another and savoring and taking the time. And I believe, as was just pointed out, there is something of the idea of the caloric intake and quality of food, though they would never have thought of it in caloric intake terms, needs to be better for this sort of high stress, high demand work that is called upon for this gentry, this, noble class. I do really like the image Allison brought up of learning all the place settings, because I remember having this experience myself, having family take me and looking at all of these and having somebody say, just work from the outside in, and this is why. And then having occasion where a work dinner was at a fancy French restaurant that had the multitudes, and the boss was saying, well, what is this for? And I'm like, that's an amuse-bouche spoon. So between meals, you're supposed to be able to get just the chef taste, and that'll cleanse your palate. And she was only so happy to be able to pass this around like it was some rarefied, exotic knowledge that set her apart. It was a status thing for her. Whereas for me, it was just like, oh, yeah, I remember going through this hell with my mother when I was young, and thinking I would never need this knowledge anywhere in my life ever again. But I do like what Brian pointed out about needing to know what happens, how the sausage is made, to be able to make such a pointed critique of how somebody's doing it. And I think that is part of the dirty secret of Confucius when he talked about having to work. And we all spoke about, oh, he probably worked as a funeral director at one time. He probably cooked a meal or two for himself at that point as well. But that would be shameful to admit of the master. However, it is probably part of the wealth of many things that he was privy to that kind of sit in his sorted past of pedestrian jobs. Not that he was a professional chef, but he at least did have to work his way around a kitchen once or twice.
Joy, thank you. You're muted.
I think Confucius is very detailed. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Yeah, I think he also suggests many very good the food processing. He say that eat only at meal times, don't eat food that smells bad, don't consume the food that is not well cooked, eat the fresh and the local, do not eat food out of the season, don't eat when the sauces and the seasoning are not correctly prepared. Eat ginger, but in moderation, and know the origin of the source of your food. And the way you cut your food reflects the way you live. I think it's very good. I was seeing some other commentary. And meat should be eaten in moderation. Eat only until you need not limit drinking, but do not drink to the point of confusion. Hygiene is the essential in food and the preparation. In responding to Jason's question, I think, yeah, this is something to reflect, how we make friends. I was just thinking, yeah, how you usually, eat the same food with your friends, most of the time, probably the similar food that you enjoy together. So I don't know, it's probably the reflection of how you make your friends or friendship. So the commentary say that Confucius' philosophy strongly believe the food and the friends are inseparable part of life. The life without food and the friends is considered as incomplete and improper. So I think it's pretty, reasonable and logical. I think in another way to reflect, how we eat and the character and like a similar people that you hang out with and that you eat with and that you have the same, maybe the concept that you think about to eating the meat or the food, the same processing, the procedure. So I think, I think Confucius is very detailed and precise to know what he want the food, how to process. But I think he's also emphasized probably the friend that we meet and like the food, he was like in hidden, maybe in metaphor, the food, if the food, smell bad, you don't eat it. This is similar to some friend, if they have very bad character, or they don't have very good behavior, I don't know. So maybe it's better not to get close to, or maybe to get polluted, or maybe to get affected by their the habit or the different way of eating or different way of how to behave. That's in responding to what Jason's asking. Just simply to talk about the food, I think there's some hidden of the meaning behind it, maybe to be segregated, or maybe to be make sure clean and to be careful who you with to eat the food with, and to well control and on top of you the people that you meet and how you doing with the food that you are going to eat.
I very much appreciate that contribution, because I think that you know, it's something that's actually that we can still relate to, and then there's the practical aspect of it as well. And I think that there's this, you know, the idea of your friendships or who you're associating with and your eating habits that you're acquiring within those relationships. There is significance to that, in the sense that you do have to be careful about you know, who you associate with, not because you're an elitist as much as I would say as that that if you're around, your character may not be strong enough to sustain itself around people that don't necessarily behave badly. So it's an act of humility, not necessarily an act of elitism in that particular instance. That's the way I kind of view that. When people say I need to be around, you know, people that are going to make me better, I don't necessarily automatically judge that as something as a class thing, as much as it is a how a person would handle themselves and learn. But anyway, we have Ms. Chara, then Brian and Patty.
The again, recovering Jason's question, at least to the extent I remember it, you know, is this kind of eating an expression of virtue, or is this description or prescription of eating an expression of virtue? And I would guess that it is, to, let's say not entirely, but to a great extent. But also it's an expression of the virtue in a kind of, if you will, a Confucian way, in a cultural way, in a way that respects the past, because he did not invent these rules of hygiene or etiquette or good cuisine. He didn't come up with these recipes and how to cut meat and finish off rice. This was already a culture that was passed to him, and he's embracing it as is appropriate for his status. So if it's a virtue, it's one that's been passed down to him, and he's embracing that that heritage.
Thank you, Brian. Ms. Chara, and then we'll go on to the next one.
Sure. I think that Joy kind of hit the nail on the head with what I was trying to express earlier, that the way that I'm seeing this is that the quality of food, the preparation of the food, the quality of their associates and things like that, if it didn't reach a specific kind of threshold, then it would interfere with their ability to serve the state. So she, you know, hit the nail on the head. I wanted to give her that compliment.
Well, thank you. With that, why don't we move on to 10, I guess. Well, it depends.
So, excuse me. So let's read the next 4 short verse. They all related to food. So we finish the food. Okay. So up to the point, like you don't sit proper positioned, you will not sit on it. Okay. The mat, the sitting mat should be proper. So we probably the 4 short verse before Confucius drinking with the villagers.
Okay, so I'm going to need a minute. Penny, would you like to start us off? Because I got to extract. Mine has a whole bunch of commentary, and then I have to go through multiple pages. But go ahead, Penny, get us started.
When he had been assisting at the prince's sacrifice, he did not keep the flesh which he received overnight. The flesh of his family sacrifice he did not keep over 3 days. If kept over 3 days, people could not eat it. When eating, he did not converse. When in bed, he did not speak. Although his food might be coarse rice and vegetable soup, he would offer a little of it in sacrifice with a grave, respectful air.
One more. Can you read one more short version?
That was not straight. He did not sit on it.
Okay, thank you.
Give me 1 minute. So I'm assuming you're going to want the next 4 here. All right, so let me try and go ahead. Even with coarse rice and vegetable soup, he always offered in sacrifice and always was solemnity. If his mat was not set right, Confucius would not sit on it. When attending village drinking
Oh,
ceremonies.
stop here. Yeah, I think you missed the first 2.
So
You go back on. Okay.
Because those were part of your previous chapter.
those are part of my previous chapter.
Yeah,
this
so
is
probably,
Do you want me to read? Do you want me to read?
Yeah,
the
why don't you read
DC
it?
Lao?
Yeah, why don't you read the DC Lao so there's not
It'll be a
of-
little easier to follow. So following from Ginger,
yes. After
DC Lao 10.9.
yes.
After assisting at a sacrifice at his lord's place, he did not keep his portion of the sacrificial meat overnight. In other cases, he did not keep the sacrificial meat for more than 3 days. Once it was kept beyond 3 days, he would no longer eat it. 10.10. He did not converse at meals, nor did he talk in bed. 10.11. Even when a meal consisted only of coarse rice and vegetable broth, he inevitably made an offering of them and invariably did so solemnly. 10.12. He did not sit unless his mat was straight.
Okay, thank you.
So okay.
So let's do this. Okay, so there's a 4 in my version. I have the 4 short verses. Okay, so first, the sacrificial meat brought back from the state temple wasn't kept overnight. Common sacrificial meat wasn't kept for over 3 days. Once it had been left out for 3 days, he did not eat it. Okay, so the question would be why, right? So one way to understand is when the meat used for the sacrificial meat in the state temple, you use the word gong, okay? That means public or official, because it has been there probably already overnight. So when you bring home, because the prince will, I assume if you do the state temple, they probably have big portion of meat. So the prince will give the meat to his minister, say Confucius. So that meat already left there for 1 day. So when he brought that home, he will eat immediately or not overnight, right? So otherwise, one is a hygiene reason. Another way is probably related to ritual, because later on, he will talk about when the prince give you food or you eat with prince, you eat immediately first, okay, to taste it, okay? So for example, your boss give you some food, you immediately eat, okay? So another reason could be ritual, you have to do this way. And then later on, if you do the sacrificial meat for your own home, of course, it's fresh, so you can live for 3 days. If over 3 days, you don't eat. 10.10, Confucius didn't teach or discuss during meal times. He didn't talk in bed. So I think that's important to distinguish these two words. He said 食不语, okay, he remember he used the word 语. That's the same word when I forget in which chapter or 7.21. Okay, the master did not discuss of 4 things, right? Abnormality, military, turmoil, or mysteries. So doesn't mean that he doesn't mention or talk about it. He doesn't discuss, doesn't teach about these things. So that's why I use 语. Same as analect in Chinese called 论语. Okay, same word because you are teaching, discussion, serious discussion. So I don't think that means Confucius don't speak during the meal. Okay, he doesn't do the serious talking, teaching, discussion during mealtime. He didn't talk in bed. So I think so for the quality of sleep, I think. Chapter 11. Although his food might be coarse food or vegetable soup, he will offer a portion of it for sacrifice, like during the fasting. So during the fasting, there are certain days you have to do the fasting. And during the fasting, you have to offer food for your ancestor. But here he said, Confucius during the meal, you can compare with 10.8. Sounds like Confucius eat a lot, or he keep talking about food, but probably in the most of the time he eat very simple, right? Here he talk about although his food might be coarse food or vegetable soup, that means very simple food. But even for this simple food, he will take a portion to offer to his ancestor. I also realize, it's same custom being running in my family, because especially when I recall when I was young, my grandpa would take portion of food, because when we eat on the dining table, next to the dining table have the shrine or tablet for my ancestor. So when we eat, certain time we still will take a portion of food, put on in front of the ancestor, kind of like a share with my ancestor. This kind of custom, I've been experienced when I was a kid, and also happened during certain periods of time. Okay, so we will do this way. I think it's still carry in some family, but not that serious, but take a portion. So the interesting word here, Chinese word used is gua, okay, which means melon. Okay, so why melon? He talk about melon, right? I'm glad that no translation translate as melon. Okay, but the meaning of melon is nobody eat a melon, just a whole, right? You don't eat a whole melon. Doesn't matter what kind of melon. You usually you always cut the melon in a small portion. So here melon used as a verb. So use the food like treating the food like a melon. So you take a small part and give to the ancestor. That's this verse talking about. Chapter 12. If a mat not properly positioned, he will not sit on it. So this one, it didn't mention Confucius, so we just assume it's Confucius. So if you compare to the food, right? So these two verses usually put together. If the how do you say the food is not cut properly, he doesn't eat. If the mat is not set properly, positioned properly, he doesn't sit. So in another way, he's not like a spoiled kid, right? He reject the food not cut properly, don't want to sit if the sitting. I look at another way around. When he eat, he always make sure the food cut properly. He always make sure his chair, his sitting mat position properly, right? You don't want to turn, have your leg on the table. Okay, you don't want, so you want to sit proper and have the foot proper in front of you. I think that's the ritual he's talking about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Aman.
Thank you. Yeah, here I feel we're much more on the ground of the kosher and the food safety. But not just kosher in terms of food safety, though I do believe most people probably pluck that out right from the get-go, that the idea of when you can take sacrificial meat, when you would eat it, there's as much ritual involved there as there is just generally good food safety practices. If it's been out for more than a day, it's questionable. Out for more than 3 days, no, nobody gets to touch it. And that's not just about, it has gone bad, both spiritually and biologically at that point. You have missed the window for making good ritualistically, and you have missed the window for it being a nourishing meal. When we get into that idea of the sacrifice of a portion of food, this took me back. As soon as Jason was talking about it, I immediately went to every Taoist temple I've ever been to. There's a bunch of oranges. Oranges are now the sacrifice of choice for most shrines. And that's because they keep. They're pretty, they stack well, and they harken back to this idea of a portioned melon that could be shared. In fact, the last Taoist temple I went to, I made sure, I was like, can I give an offering of oranges? They're like, absolutely. This isn't your temple, but thank you for the offering. Come on in. And then it was just kind of, an interesting thing. When I lived in Thailand, one of my teachers lived with a family of 8, I want to say, on a tin roof shack built out over a dock. It's when I saw my first wharf rat, which I mistook for a cat because the thing was so big. They were not a wealthy family. They were a great family. They were very warm, very welcoming. I went to dinner at my teacher's house many a night, and they made a tiny bit of food stretch of, miles and miles, because a traditional Thai dinner lasts anywhere from 2 to 5 hours of eating and drinking and eating and drinking. And every time we walked by, there was a neighborhood. It was for everyone who lived on the dock, shrine at the end of the neighborhood where everyone in the neighborhood made offerings. And I watched Grandma walk down with a portion of meat to put on the shrine. And I thought to myself, that was a third of the meal. How are they doing? It is a real sacrifice for some people. And it is ubiquitous in Asian culture that there is some ancestral shrine for sacrifice. And it has been this way since the time of Confucius, and probably long before. When the mat was not proper, he would not sit. Yes, this could be about, Confucius wasn't going to eat at a TV tray. He needed a dinner table. That the things had to be right. It wasn't acceptable to just phone it in. But I do think this gives a flavor of just how very particular and persnickety the master could be. And I think that rings true throughout the Analects, but it's a little tiny pithy passage like this that really kind of drives it home to me that, oh, he really was exactly as as advertised. He would not sit until somebody put that match right. It had to be correct, and it had to be correct every time, because only through that proper repetition were the qualities of a ginsher developed. And any allowance to just, we'll let it slide this one time was one time too many for him.
You know, I very much appreciate that, because I feel like it's somebody that that does not sit, you know, that stands and eats, and just this is in modern times, that they're in a rush, that they're actually not, you know, going through and appreciating the meal itself, the food in front of them, and you know that there's a ritualistic aspect to it as well. That's the way I look at it, is that, you know, some people they can't wait to get the food in their mouth, and you know that they're not even thinking about what they're eating, and they're not even considering it. And I think that there's a certain amount of respect that is being given when one sits down and slowly considers what they're consuming, and there's an appreciation that comes with that. And in certain cases, chew slowly, so you're actually enjoying what you're eating as well. Jason.
Yeah, I just want to clarify about sacrificial meat. Okay, so the Chinese tradition is when you got, doesn't matter how much you offer, right? And then you still eat it, take it back. So it's not like in the Jewish temple, I mean, the first temple, you offer, you burn it. No, basically offer, and then you take it back. So it doesn't matter how much you offer, you still take it back to eat. So that's the thing I like to clarify. You don't waste. I just also recall my grandpa told me when I was young. My grandpa said his father said, "It's how wasteful if you eat meat without providing sacrifice." So in another way, you don't buy meat unless you need to sacrifice. So you know that's the situation my grandpa told me when he was young, the situation. So it reflects some of the tradition here.
Thank you, Jason. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Share that. I'm going to follow that. It's like why your parent, your grandpa saying that. I can assume that time that's how Chinese tradition have food, but not that rich enough. Every day have meat. So I agree. Like my grandparents are going to see the same thing. We have a special holiday like spring festival or something special, or somebody or 80, you turn to 60 years old or get a wedding or some funeral, you have meat kind, very special moment. We can afford and buy meat. For me, back to the chapter about food, I'm going to share, randomly from table manner. Normally, if you, for me or myself, when I was child, left hand bowl, right hand chopstick. If the food not ready, sometimes the kid you try play, they use chopstick tap the bowl. It's not good, not allowed. There's some table manner. Also, food ready. Normally, if especially have a guest first, elderly first, and we use a chopstick, share the food with elderly first. And before that, it's also tradition, especially village, you're going to sacrifice food, put your, some normally put your, the special room, you have photo, your ancestor photo, or some fruit over there, you're going to sacrifice food, like put it there, show the respect. For me, from this another side, it's Asian culture or that's Chinese cultures, the connection between yourself, your ancestor, relationship. Every day you think, oh, that's from my parents or something. So yeah, that's very also. It's just now withdraw my observation about thank you, you guys put me back. Yeah, it's about ritual and li, right? even you eat it's normal food, you still remember your the guaji, use some of them, some portion for your ancestry. Or another scenario, if my family got let's say Saturday or Sunday, that's weekend, we make some meat or fried bean, I'm going to share with my neighbor. Sometimes I sing to the neighbor, use kids, so share food. It's just make your family, your neighborhood so warm, one family, that kind of feeling. These days, slowly disappeared. People leave department, door to door. We don't know each other. We don't want our neighbor know who I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Would anybody like to respond or comment? Have any additional? Go ahead, Aman.
This is heartwarming in so many ways because I'm taking a mental tour through food culture throughout my life, from, you know, the family member who made plates for people. That's a very common Southern Black culture thing. And I have that ancestry in part of my family to make plates and pass them around for those who need them. So you make a lot of food to make sure that you're feeding the whole neighborhood. To dinners in Thailand, to, you know, tapping the bowls with the chopsticks and getting in trouble. And God forbid setting your chopsticks directly into a bowl of rice so they stick out. That's a good way to get your toes broken with a broom handle. But all of this is to say what Joy had brought up before about the social quality of food. It is inextricably linked, and it is one of the most key times that we have an opportunity to both make our Jinshi character by being more Ren, which I can say these words now after all these analects, and it makes sense as opposed to having to dissect those. Or we can break that Ren and thereby, you know, tarnish that working towards a Jinshi character. I really appreciate all of these stories, but I also have to say personally, I did not realize how hungry I was going to be going through this chapter. So we need to get on to drinking before I go off and snack on food that's no good for me.
That means we're gonna let Joy go, and then we're gonna move on because I don't want to lose them on. So Joy, go ahead.
I just want to make a short comment. I think what kind of teacher that he's very caring for taking care of the students, the food, the eatery, how the food processing. I think he cared about the health of the student and also the mental. You know, sometimes I think yesterday I just eating in one of the restaurant, and the 4 of my students walked in, and they saw me, and I was thinking I want to teach them the Mandarin Chinese language, but in my second thought, I just say I want them to enjoy the food, and I just say, okay, enjoy the food. I did not teach them how to say a word. Say maybe I want to teach them how to say the food. You know, no, not at all. So I think I'm doing the right thing. I was planning. I was intended to teach. You know, while they are eating, you know, in a restaurant. So I think Confucius is very, very good to protect the students' mental, you know, while they're eating, while they enjoy the food, don't teach. That's very, very important, okay? Just let them to enjoy, yeah, the body, the health needed, okay? And also, Confucius also caring about how people eat that, need to be clean, need to be, you know, make sure it's the right source and the right way to cut it. Or I think it's very detailed. No any teacher will care about what did you eat here. and how you going to make the food. He is like, really, but sometimes I'm thinking related to what I'm teaching. When the student is not sleeping well, he cannot learn well. So I was, nowadays, so many students, they were like, overnight, don't sleep at all. In the classroom, they are like, sleeping and sleeping. I cannot focusing. So I think the food give students nutritious is important. You need to eat fresh. You need to eat good food. You need to make sure you are in a good health condition. Then you can learn well. And also the mental is good, is important too. While you can relax while eating, you don't teach. You don't give them the exam or you don't give them the homework. Just let them to relax. Sometimes we are too intensive. Like in Asia, education school, they are eating and learning, all the time. It makes so nervous, so anxious. So I think this is a very good principle that helping us educator that to really pay attention to students, not only the learning academically, but also pay attention to what is their health condition. What do they eat? It's important. And what do they really relaxing, enjoy the life, and the very good, relaxation, where they needed to balance. So it's a good for learning too, in fact. So I really admire what a great teacher is. And he was pointing out a very good principle. Thank you.
I felt like you were, no, I felt like one of your students. I mean, truthfully, I'm both tired and hungry as well. So with that, we shall shall we go on to, I am going to venture to say,
we can go the next 4, right? Until the medicine, the Kangzi give the medicine to Confucius. So another 4 short. From the drinking with village to taking the medicine. So we're done with food. So we do the drinking and then blah, 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 and then medicine. So.
Okay. So Penny, would you like to start?
Sure. Chapter 10, mine says, chapter 10. When the villagers were drinking together, on those who carried staffs going out, he went out immediately after. When the villagers were going through their ceremonies to drive away pestilential influences, he put on his court robes and stood on the eastern steps. When he was sending complimentary inquiries to anyone in another state, he bowed twice as he escorted the messenger away. Shikang, having sent him a present of physic, bowed and received it, saying, I do not know it. I dare not taste it.
So, excuse me, can you read that part again? The Kangzi sent him something?
Yeah, Kangzi, having sent him a present of, it looks like physic.
Present and the physics?
Physic or,
It's an old word for medicine.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Present of medicine. He bowed and received it, saying,
Okay. So that's
I
the
do
medicine.
not know it. I dare not taste it. Yeah, I was like, what is this?
Okay, that makes a lot more sense to me as well.
So I don't see any medicine here.
Yeah, I mean, mine actually does say medicine. So, and thank you for that clarification, Chris. So this is 10, 20, 21, 22, and I think I'm going to stop at 22, unless you tell me to go further. So when attending village drinking ceremonies, Confucius left only after elderly people had left. When the villagers performed their exercising ritual, Confucius was dressed in ceremonial garments for the court audience and stood at the eastern stair. When making inquiries after someone in another state, Confucius bowed twice before sending off the messenger. When Kangxi sent a gift of medicine, he bowed and received it, saying, "No, not knowing its nature, I cannot dare taste it."
Okay. So we done with the food. That's done. Let's do drinking. Okay. So that's why I think Confucius like to drink, right? So, chapter 13. When villagers gathered to drink wine, he waited and left after those with walking staff departed. So you can refer this one. So the person with walking staff, according to some explanation, is you have to be over 60, then you are allowed to carry staff. So then in a way means you are senior. Okay. So Confucius, we assume during this book is talking about Confucius was working for the government, the state of Lu. So he was between 51 to 55. I think that's the time. So if you recall on the very first chapter of this book, right, this title called Village and Neighborhood, right? So basically it's talking, and the very first chapter is talking about when Confucius talking to the villager in the neighborhood, he speak, he sounds like he cannot speak, right? That's how he described Confucius was in his village and the neighborhood. He was courteous, right? And behaved as if he could not speak. So if you remember our discussion on 2 weeks ago, Confucius behaved different, right? When he was in the court and in his village. Because in the village, he is not the boss. He is considered a lot of people senior to him. That's why, during the drinking ceremony, or you want to call it a symposium, okay, he would not leave until the person with walking staff, when the senior people left, then he go. So that's the ritual, okay, he do it. So chapter 14, a little bit different. When the villager practiced exorcism, Confucius will stand on the eastern step in court robe. Okay, so here I don't see we should translate as ritual. Okay, I think there should be some shamanism or some exorcism. That means some local shamanism exercise, right? So of course he used the words "nuo." I think they call "nuo." Okay, that's the local exorcism, to get rid of the bad spirit, which is not considered as Confucius' ritual of the ritual of the proper ritual, right? But here it shows Confucius' attitude. Even this kind of local exorcism, Confucius will stand on the eastern step. Okay, that's important. Please remember, in traditional Chinese, okay, the direction of, because your house always face south, and then on the eastern side, if you face on the side, it's on your left, right? On your left. If you face south, it's on your left, which means the boss, the owner. Okay. So why Confucius stand on the east side? That means he doesn't stay on the west side. If he stay on the west side, means he just watch it. He's not the owner. So he want to show he participate this kind of exercise because that's his village. So I think that's he means he stay on the eastern step and wearing the court robe. So in today you will dress formally, okay, kind of like that's my exercise. So even it's not the proper the proper ritual, he keep promoting. He still respect this kind of local religious behavior. Chapter 15, when Confucius asks someone to visit another state, he will bow to him twice before sending him off. That's not much to comment. Probably just means he showed his attitude to the messenger, the people, go outside. Chapter 16, Kangzi. Okay, so Kangzi is Ji Kangzi. Okay, so remember, Confucius always have a problem with Ji family. And when Confucius talk about Ji family, always has a problem. Okay, and hardly have a good word. But when Confucius deal with Meng family, has a better word because he tutoring the two students in the Meng family. But Ji family is the most powerful so-called warlord during the state of Lu. So Confucius had problem with that. But Ji Kangzi is the chief, okay, of the Ji family. Send him medicine. Okay, so Confucius probably get sick or something, not feel well. So the Ji Kangzi sent him medicine. Confucius bow as he received it, and saying, as I don't know it well, I dare not taste it. So that's an interesting situation because they are kind of a political rival, and your enemy, political rival, give you medicine. It's really have a concern to take the medicine because we don't know what's going on. So that's another way to think about. But let's go back to Zhu Xi's explanation. Zhu Xi talk about this is when the elder people give you something, you need to receive it and taste it. Okay, just like I think just like on the okay, I will talk about later. You have to taste it, but except the medicine. That's why Confucius said medicine, because I don't understand the medicine, so I don't take it. So that's the description of this one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Jason. Chris, I just noticed that you actually typed exclamation point in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to read a version.
Oh, no, it's been covered since, and I've typed out what I was thinking, so we're good. I put stuff in the chat. Thanks.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Aman.
I do think it's kind of fun watching how certain scholars just twist themselves in knots to put these into some sort of logical consistency. And what's funny about that to me is they don't know their Chinese medicine. When it talks about gathering to drink wine or performing an exorcism or even receiving medicine, there is a common thread with all of those in traditional Chinese medicine, and that is alcohol. Alcohol was actually used as a distilling compound for a lot of traditional Chinese medical formulas. And so what he's receiving from Ji Kangzi is very probably very high in some alcohol count. Many of those traditional exorcist shamanistic rituals that you would see would also have a drinking component to them. Some sort of medicine was usually imbibed and to put the shaman into a state of ecstasy or some sort of trance-like state. And so there is a common thread that actually exists between all of these, except for harder to explain 1015. When he asked someone to visit another state, he would bow to him twice before sending him off. I know what that looks like. I've seen that sort of, Ling Pai done in ritual. in many rituals. But how it would sort of attach to a drinking culture eludes anyone, and it may not in any way whatsoever, other than maybe, you know, to your health, kampai, safe travel, you know, you split a drink as you part ways. I could see that it's complete conjecture, but it would make these make some sort of logical sense, all tied together. However, it is interesting that we go from sort of this persnickety behavior surrounding food to then a very sort of permissive attitude surrounding drink, whether it is drinking with the other villagers or taking part in a ritual that you are not necessarily your ritual behavior that you would necessarily. I think of it like I dressed in the clothes they asked me to wear for the wedding, even though I don't necessarily like dressing, you know, in traditional Hindu garb per se. It's not my religion, not what I want to wear, but to show respect, I do it. He stands on the eastern slopes, he participates, even though it's not his ritual. And we then get this distinction of a bridge too far when your enemy sends you something to drink to settle your troubled spirit. Nope, that's too far. I'm very permissive. I'm willing to participate in every drinking game everyone is setting out before me, but not that one, because that one seems orchestrated to see my death on the other end. So I just find the juxtaposition of a very detail-oriented, very particular etiquette and expectations surrounding food, sort of juxtaposed to the very permissive and allowance behavior that you see surrounding drink, as long as it doesn't look like it's going to kill you.
Thank you, Mon. Would anybody else like to comment on these four chapters? There's not much in the way of comments. I don't have a lot to add for this, I'll admit myself.
So probably we can move on to next four.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, I think you covered it pretty well, and
they're all
just
very
like the way-
short. They're all very short. Probably not just like Chris talk about a cigar is a cigar. So if you just look at the fact. So
yeah, I agree with that. You know, sometimes that we can start going too far, and I think that was actually I appreciated that statement. Although I appreciate the comments too, because it's how we interpret these things that are, you know, just equally as important. Anyway,
let's go to the burning stable, and from the burning stable to the Confucius enter the Grand Temple, which is a repeat. You know, we already covered in book 3. So we can go full. And some, I think in they all combine together. So from the burning stable to from the burning stable.
And where do you want to stop?
Stop on the Grand Temple. He asks about everything. You know, Confucius.
Okay.
So
Penny, go ahead.
for Leggy, that'll be 12 through 14, Penny.
Okay. That's what I thought. All right. The stable being burned down when he was at court, on his return, he said, "Has any man been hurt?" He did not ask about the horses. When the prince sent him a gift of cooked meat, he would adjust his mat First taste it, and then give it away to others. When the prince sent him a gift of undressed meat, he would have it cooked and offer it to the spirits of his ancestors. When the prince sent him a gift of a living animal, he would keep it alive. When he was in attendance on the prince and joining in the entertainment, the prince only sacrificed. He first tasted everything. When he was ill and the prince came to visit him, he had his head to the east, made his court robes be spread over him, and drew his girdle across them. When the prince's order called him, without waiting for his carriage to be yoked, he went at once. When he entered the ancestral temple of the state, he asked about everything.
Okay, let's stop here.
Let me just, I just had to grab another one because otherwise my pages are apart and I can't just read it right in a row. The stable was burnt down. On his return from the court, Confucius asked, "Was anyone hurt?" He did not inquire after the horses. When his lord granted him a gift of food, Confucius set his mat right and tasted it first. When his lord granted him a gift of raw meat, he always had it cooked and offered it to his ancestors. When his lord granted him a gift of a living animal, he always reared it. When having a meal in attendance on his lord, he ate first while the Lord offered in sacrifice. When he was ill and his Lord came to visit him, Confucius had his head laid to the east, his body covered with ceremonial garments for the court audience, and his girdle drawn across them. When his lord summoned him with an order, Confucius moved out without waiting for the horses to be yoked to his carriage. When entering the great shrine, Confucius asked about everything.
Okay, that's to add to the medicine. Okay. The stable was burned. When the master returned from court, he asked, "Was anybody hurt?" He didn't ask about the horses. So I think that the message is quite obvious, right? He cared about the people more than the animal. And remember, during that time, how many horses you have is kind of like the fortune you have. That's your property. So when the prince sent him cooked food, he will always set his mat in the proper position and taste it. So that's important, right? When the prince gives him food, he will sit. Remember, we talked about he has a mat set properly and then eat immediately. Okay, that's the ritual, okay, or the courtesy way to do it. When the prince sent him uncooked food, he will always cook it and offer it to his ancestor. So remember, in Chinese offering, the sacrificial offering is offering the cooked meat, right? The cooked food. You don't offer the raw meat, live chicken, something like this. You cook and offer to you. So that shows Confucius. God received the uncooked meat, which he will cook it and offer to the ancestor. Or again, you don't offer the food twice. Okay, you cannot just like when the Lord gives him food, right? Cooked food usually has been used for sacrificial offering. So you cannot offer one more time. So that's very important. You don't do twice because even you say, hey, let's steal a whole chicken. No, it's been offered, then you have to eat. You cannot say, okay, let's give to Joe and Joe can offer to his ancestor. No, you cannot do that. You have to only do it once. Okay. So when the prince sent him live animals, he will always rear them. So you don't slaughter the animal. Doesn't matter what kind of animal your Lord give to you. You should keep alive. when he attend meal with the prince, if the prince offered sacrifice, he will taste the food for the prince. So that's the ritual or the courtesy way to do it. Chapter 19, when he was ill, the prince visited him. He will face eastward, cover with his court robe, and lay his sash on top of them. So that's important, right? So when we assume Confucius was very sick, cannot get up, right? So he lie on bed, but the prince has concern about his well-being. So visit him, that's very common. So remember, he faced eastward. So that means he stay on the west side and face eastward. That means the prince is the boss, is the owner. The prince come to my home. He's not my guest. He is the boss. He's the master of this house when the prince come. So I face east to receive the prince. And you don't see prince with your pajama or your daily clothes. You always receive your prince in the proper clothes. But he was too sick to get up. So he will lay his court robe on his body and put the sash. Sash also important. Remember, he always put the jade on that. So on top of the robe, so to show his proper attitude, even he cannot really get up and wear it. So that's how Confucius do. Number 20, also important, right? When the prince summoned him, he will not wait for the horses to be yoked to his carriage. So that means when your boss, the Lord, summon you, you go immediately. Even your car, your carriage is not ready. You stay there, wait until it's ready to show your attitude. 21, when he entered the grand temple, he asked about everything. So I think this one is a repeat from book 3, chapter 15. Okay, so we don't have, so he has a lot of questions. So this one probably a mistake to put here, doesn't sound it fit in this book.
Go ahead, Ma.
I can honestly say that I don't have a great deal to offer here. Was anybody hurt when the stables burned? That's actually a pretty popular line from the Analects. It's curious because it is seen as an act of his humaneness, of his ren. Whereas, as Jason pointed out, really the proper gentleman should have been concerned about how many horses did I lose, because that has, eroded my wealth, is eroded my standing. When the prince summoned him, he didn't wait for the horses to be yoked to his carriage. This was probably, to my thinking, telling of when he had a job. One of the very few times he had a job and needed to go and show himself eager and present at once. I don't think this would have read the same had it occurred 30 years later on, because he would have said, oh no, we're going to wait and do this the proper way. A, because his sense of propriety had developed, and B, because he wasn't his boss. He may have been the prince and worthy of, great respect, but great respect meant actually taking the time to do the proper thing. So it's interesting to think that the proper thing to his mind as a younger employed man may not have been the proper thing to his mind as an older man. And I think that those are probably two of the most leap out and salient points of these few chapters.
Thank you for that, Amon. Brian or Penny?
So the maybe Amon has already spoken to this. I rang in earlier. I was, it always taken away exactly as Aman said that Confucius had a job only once, or a political appointment only once, an appointment to the court only once, and that was early in his career. And for the rest, he was a failure in his career, except for his teaching. But now, when I read this chapter, it seems like he's in constant contact and intercourse with the prince. Prince is sending him cooked meat, raw meat, live animals, visiting him when he's sick. They sit together at occasions. Who is this prince? Is it only one prince, or is it something he did with princes in general? Was he called by princes in general? And is this something that princes would do for someone who's not in the court? I just am a little confused about who's the prince, what do princes tend to do, and does this tell us anything about Confucius' status as a government official and thereafter?
Well, okay, so first, book 10 is special. Book 10, it's all about Confucius during his short employment, which is about 4 years. So the rest of part, Confucius visit different place, right? That's after he got fired. Okay, so he only been, you think about a person, Confucius, a great man, he never got a job until 51 or something. And then worked for 4 years, then he got fired. Then he traveled around and probably tried to get another job. I don't know, or promote his idea. And so that's the story of Confucius' life. So book 10 is all about these 4 years or 5 years during his, if Kwang is here, Kwang will tell you exactly time, but basically it's about 4 or 5 years during his employment. And he probably only deals with one prince. And I don't remember the prince's name, but Kwang, if here, he will tell me. But I think it's Ai Gong, the Duke Ai's son, I think. That's during that period of time. Okay, so Ji family is in power. So that's the time. So I hope I answer your question. Because
yes, thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments that anybody would like to share regarding these verses? All I could say is that I am also was actually previously familiar with verse 1023 for me, which is the stable burnt down, and on return from the court, Confucius asked, was anyone hurt? And so this idea is humanity that was coming out in that particular instance. But would anybody else like to add anything? We're up against we got about 4 minutes left. Go ahead, Aman.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I've got food cooking in the other room that I'm smelling now, which is making it even harder to focus, which brings me Joy's point home very well, that hungry minds don't concentrate well. I put a photo example from actually a temple that I was fortunate enough to get to participate in one of their ceremonies, a Tianjin Fahui ceremony. But this is a typical example of a shrine offering. And you can see the melons, the oranges, and everything else for anyone who can actually see the chat. If you can't, I'm sorry. I'd been looking for that picture for a while to offer. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, to offer as an example, this is what a temple or shrine offering will often look like. And the dried fruit or fruit that will keep whole through the offering and then still be good later, always a good thing. If you slice into any one of those, even though that's what the image of slicing the guan or melon means, that sliced piece is a sacrifice. You're not going to eat it hours later or days later. And it's struck me that the Tianjin ceremony is all about food donation and ancestry worship. I was taking a quick peek at their website, and it's funny, they have weight totals for 2016, 17, fall of 17, May of 2019, and it's 14,000 pounds, 19,000 pounds, 15,000 pounds, 16 of how much food they collected for an offering at one ceremony. This is a Taoist temple that has so many Confucian aspects to it that they bring in a ceremonial expert for these fa hui, or Dharma merit building ceremonies. And they do ancestor sacrifice, just like the Confucians would centuries ago. But then that food is, for the most part, donated to the food bank in Vancouver, BC. But there are exceptions, because some people bring food specifically for one of their ancestors, and it could be something like pizza. Like, here's a Domino's pizza because Uncle Wong loved Domino's pizza. And yes, we're going to eat it after his spirit has consumed the essence of it, but we can't donate that. And people would also bring things like, oh yeah, Grandma May loved to smoke, Marlboros, so there's a pack of Marlboros offered as well. It gets very idiosyncratic, and it's really interesting to sort of see this ancestor worship in action, whether it has a Confucian flavor, a Taoist flavor, or a Buddhist flavor. It is the pan-Chinese cultural and pan-Asian norm stemming from that Chinese culture. I know that's not saying anything about these specific chapters as a whole, but I wanted to thank everybody, and I'm glad I found this before the end of the night. I look forward to finishing the Analects next week. Let's give that a hand, and start on the Art of War, because it's much more artistic.
I'm in agreement with you.
There's the dinner bell.
Have a great evening. Thank you as always, Aman, for your insight.
Thank you all.
Much appreciate it.
See you later.
See ya. Take care. So with that, does anybody else have any other comments they wish to share? If not, Brian?
I want to give a shout out to the new people who came. I think it's great when new people show up.
Yes, one of them has unfortunately just left, I believe. But yes, I think Chris had left, and I'm trying to think, and everybody else I think is somewhat regular. So I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'll just announce some upcoming events, and we will go from there.